I stood at the edge of the rented patio, holding a paper plate with 2 untouched deviled eggs, smiling like someone who belonged there. The banner above the arch read, "Happy Retirement, Mary," in gaudy gold script. The catering staff wore black vests and blank expressions. The DJ played music no one danced to, and the voices of my family drifted in soft, poisonous waves from the next table. "She's still driving that rust bucket, right?" my daughter-in-law, Ashley, said, between sips of mimosa. Laughter followed. "The one with the duct tape on the mirror," someone chimed in. "It looks like a toaster that's been through war," another voice added, and this time it was Daniel, my son. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just stared down at the letter in my apron pocket, the one I'd been carrying around all week. The paper had softened from being folded too often, but the ink still bled bold. Property title, 3-4. They didn't know it was there, sitting just above my hip, the deed to the house they thought I'd already given up. I hadn't. I shifted my plate to the other hand, careful not to crumple the corner. I didn't want to leave a mark. Earlier that week, Ashley had asked me, told me that they'd begun converting my master bedroom into a nursery. She said it casually, like an afterthought. "We figured it made sense. Now that you'll be in the assisted living apartment across town, you'll love it. Activities, every day." Daniel had smiled too wide, like a waiter delivering bad news, with a side of charm. "It's close to the dog park, Mom. You'll get used to it." I'd nodded. That was my mistake. I hadn't argued. I hadn't reminded them whose name was on the deed, or that I was still paying the taxes. I just nodded. Now, standing on gravel that hurt my ankles in heels I hadn't worn in years, I felt the smile on my face harden. Ashley had once called me graceful under pressure. She didn't know it was just endurance. A skill you develop when your life has depended on silence. Daniel raised his glass and tapped the side with a butter knife. "Can I have your attention?" he called out, face beaming. "Before the cake comes out, I want to say a few words about the woman who made all this possible." Guest turned. I stayed where I was, frozen, in my apron and floral blouse, like some over-decorated relic. A few strangers clapped. "She raised me alone, put me through college, and even helped us buy our dream home." He gestured toward Ashley, who placed a manicured hand over her heart. "We're starting a family now, and none of it would have happened without her. Let's toast to Mary, the most generous mom and soon-to-be grandma anyone could ask for." Cheers erupted. People clinked glasses. Someone shouted, "You're an inspiration." I forced a smile again, the same one I'd worn when my husband died, when my sister got sick, when Daniel first called me old-fashioned for not wanting to email legal documents instead of meeting face-to-face. Ashley stood next to him now, recording it all on her phone. "Say something, Mary," she coaxed. "Let's hear it from the woman of the hour." I stepped forward slowly, placing my plate on a side table and straightening the apron strings behind me. I pulled the letter from my pocket and held it at my side, just out of frame, from Ashley's camera. "I'm honored," I said quietly, voice smooth as tea on Sunday mornings. "This has been quite a life, and I'm glad I could help where I could." Ashley stepped forward, looping an arm through mine like we were best friends. "You still help. That's what makes you so special." That word still stuck like a thorn in my throat. A child ran past us, screaming something about cake. The crowd dispersed a little. Ashley leaned in and whispered, "Don't wander off, Mary. The home representative is coming to talk logistics." She winked. I smiled again, wider this time. "Of course, dear. Wouldn't want to be late." I stepped away, weaving through the crowd until I reached the car. My old sedan sat in the side lot, paint peeling. Antenna bent, rearview mirror held by 2 strips of duct tape. Someone had drawn a heart on the dusty rear windshield. I opened the driver's door and sank into the seat. The air smelled like stale gum and sun-warmed vinyl. I rolled down the window halfway and let the noise of the party blur into background chatter. Then I unfolded the letter again. My late husband and I had paid off this house 30 years ago. His name had come off the title when he passed, but mine had never left it. I kept the deed in the glove box until Ashley started looking through my drawers. Then I moved it to my apron. Now it was back where it belonged. They laughed at my car, but it carried everything I had left: my name, my home, and the decision they didn't get to make for me. The catering crew wheeled out a cake in the shape of a clock, frosting hands frozen at 12 Erin. Time's up. It seemed to say, but not for me. I reached over to the passenger seat, opened the glove box, and placed the deed inside. Then I closed it with a gentle snap and turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, as it always did, then roared like a memory that refused to be buried. The car didn't stall. Not this time. It rumbled with the quiet defiance of something underestimated, like me. I didn't pull away just yet. I sat there in the side lot, watching from behind the windshield as Ashley and Daniel posed for pictures with the cake, arms around each other, smiling wide for people who didn't know any better. No one noticed I was gone. No one checked. When I finally shifted into reverse, the gravel crunched like dry bones under the tires. I eased the car around the bend, leaving the party behind. No honks, no waves, no one stopped me. The turn signal clicked as I pulled onto the road, a steady rhythm to break the silence. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just drove. The route home felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the weight in my chest, or the realization that even after giving so much, I'd somehow become disposable. Daniel used to call me, after every job interview, asking me to read over his emails. Ashley once sobbed in my arms when they couldn't conceive the first time, thanking me for being her anchor. That was 4 years ago. Now I was just the old woman with the weird car. The house came into view. My house, brick-fronted, navy shutters. The porch Daniel, painted when he was 13, slapping white streaks onto his sneakers and laughing when the brush stuck to the railing. The driveway was full. Ashley's SUV parked close to the steps, their second-hand hatchback crooked by the curb. I eased in behind it. I didn't go inside immediately. I just sat. The engine ticked as it cooled, and the sun had started to slide low behind the trees. I reached for the deed again, smoothing the creases. My name gleamed on it like a whisper. Mary Ellen Cartwright, sole owner. I used to keep it tucked in a folder behind the dryer. Daniel had asked for it once, casually, back when Ashley was researching refinancing options. I'd pretended not to hear. Inside, the house was quiet. My shoes echoed on the hardwood as I stepped into the kitchen. A vase of drooping tulips sat on the table. A stack of mail lay unopened by the fruit bowl. I checked the wall clock. 6. They'd be home soon. The room had changed again. Ashley's pregnancy magazines were stacked on the nightstand. My quilt was gone, replaced by a taupe throw I didn't recognize. The closet door was ajar, half filled with storage bins and neatly labeled drawers, baby clothes, keepsakes, maternity dresses. I wasn't in the picture anymore. In the hallway, their voices drifted in, muffled by the front door, laughter, footsteps. Then the lock clicked, and they were inside. "Oh, good," Ashley said, walking into the kitchen with a box of takeout. "You're back. We didn't see you leave the party." Daniel looked at me, surprised. "Thought you were sticking around for cake." I didn't answer. I placed the folded deed on the table, beside the mail, and opened the fridge. Most of my groceries were gone. My yogurt, my orange juice, even the glass jar of strawberry preserves I kept behind the milk. Gone. In their place were cartons of oat milk and prepped containers labeled Megan's meal plan. Ashley followed my gaze. "We've been trying to make space for healthier stuff, baby safe. We figured you wouldn't mind cutting back." I closed the fridge, without a word. Daniel cleared his throat. "Hey, did Megan call? She wants to meet tomorrow, show you the retirement apartment in person. I think you'll like it. There's a walking garden." I turned. Finally. "I'm not moving." Ashley laughed, short and sharp. "Mary, we've already started transitioning things." "I didn't agree to anything," I said. Daniel stepped forward, voice soft, like he thought I might break. "Mom, it's not about the deed. I didn't give you the house," I said, "and I'm not going anywhere." Silence. Ashley placed the takeout on the counter harder than necessary. "We're just trying to plan ahead, Mary. This is bigger than you now." "No," I said calmly. "It's exactly about me." I left the kitchen and returned to my room. I pulled open the bottom drawer and found it nearly empty. A single pair of slippers. One nightgown, the lavender sachet I tucked there months ago, was missing. I sat on the bed, hands folded in my lap, My fingers ached from holding the steering wheel too tight. My shoulders hurt from years of not being allowed to collapse. Outside the window, the porch light flickered on automatically. Ashley's voice carried through the hall. "She'll come around," she said. "We'll give it a few days. Then we'll tell the realtor to proceed." Daniel didn't respond. They were waiting me out. They thought I'd go quietly. I stood, pulled the curtain aside, and looked out at the car, the old sedan, parked in the streetlight's halo like a loyal dog. The deed was back in the glove box, safe. They thought I'd given up, but they'd forgotten something. This was my house, and I hadn't left yet. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of the ache in my back or the distant thrum of the Baby Name podcast Ashley played on her phone. No, it was something deeper, like my own heartbeat was sitting up inside me, asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. I lay on my side, facing the wall, one hand under my cheek, and the other curled around the edge of the mattress, like I might fall off if I let go. The silence wasn't comforting. It was crowded with memories, regrets, and the kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being forgotten. I closed my eyes and let the darkness play back my life in fragments, not a movie, not a dream, just flashes of who I'd been before they started calling me a burden. Daniel had been born early, with jaundice and a scream that tore through the delivery ward like it had something to prove. I'd held him skin to skin for hours after the nurses gave me the all clear. My husband, Dennis, hadn't made it in time. Snowstorm, traffic, the usual kinds of absence, but I'd done it. Alone, but not afraid. Years later, it was just the two of us. Dennis died from a pulmonary embolism when Daniel was 8. I was 37, barely scraping by on substitute teaching gigs and stitching alterations at night. I couldn't afford grief. I ironed Daniel's uniform each morning and packed his lunch with handwritten notes like "You're stronger than the math test," and "Today, I love you more than ever." Sometimes he brought them home, folded into his science binder. I kept a few. In 4th grade, he came home crying because someone said his jacket was from a thrift store. It was, but I had sewn his initials into the sleeve lining in gold thread, DJC. He wore it the next day anyway. He used to thank me for things. Quietly, in the car, after long days, or while we folded laundry together. "Thanks for the ride, Mom," or "Thanks for the grilled cheese." I always told him he didn't need to say it, but I'm glad he did. At least I know he meant it once. I got up just after 5. The house was dark. Except for the faint light in the stairwell, I padded quietly to the kitchen and filled the kettle. The cupboards looked different now. New handles, frosted glass. I opened one, searching for my tea tin. It wasn't there. I checked the others, eventually finding it on the far right shelf behind Ashley's vitamin organizer and a jar labeled pregnancy-friendly snacks. My chamomile was still inside, the sachets crushed but whole. I held one to my nose and inhaled. Familiarity still lived here, if only in traces. While the water boiled, I opened the drawer near the sink and pulled out my old recipe book. The spine cracked like brittle bone. A few index cards fluttered out. One landed near my slipper. Pumpkin bread, Daniel's favorite, was scribbled across the top in my younger handwriting, a little tilt to the left, neat but soft. I remembered the day he came home from college, for the first time, gray hoodie, duffel bag, eyes sunken from exams. I had baked that exact bread. He tore off a piece before I could slice it and said, mouthful, "No one cooks like you, Mom." That was before Ashley. I heard a noise behind me. Daniel stood at the kitchen entrance, hair messy, pajama bottoms still creased from sleep. "You're up early," he mumbled. "So are you," I said. He nodded, rubbing his neck. "Had to pee. Saw the light." I placed the tea bag in the cup and poured the water slowly. "I was thinking about making pumpkin bread." He blinked. "From the old recipe?" "Yes." He hesitated, then said, "That was always good." I didn't respond. He shifted his weight like he wanted to say more, but the silence stretched too long, and he gave up. "Well, I'll be back in bed if you need anything." I nodded, eyes still on the tea. "Thanks." When he left, I pulled the recipe card closer. The edges had yellowed, one corner had a fingerprint of cinnamon. Mine, I traced it with my thumb, and felt something inside me tighten. They didn't know what I'd given. Ashley once told someone I had mild hoarder tendencies because I kept every crayon drawing Daniel ever made. She didn't know I'd memorized the shade of green he always used for trees. When they struggled with their mortgage, I cashed out one of my retirement CDs to help. No questions asked. Just a transfer. They promised they'd pay it back when things were more stable. They never mentioned it again. I remembered nights babysitting Ashley's niece late into the evening so they could have date nights. I'd rock the baby to sleep while my joints screamed. I did it because I wanted to be included, because I thought that if I showed them I still had value, I wouldn't be replaced. I was wrong. I sat down at the kitchen table with my tea and let the warmth seep into my hands. Dawn was creeping in through the blinds, brushing light across the floor like hope that hadn't made up its mind yet. The refrigerator kicked on. I pulled out a pen and added a small line to the bottom of the recipe card. Do not forget who you were before they stopped looking. I folded it in half and slipped it into the pocket of my apron. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And in the quiet hum of the kitchen, I began to remember who I had been long before anyone tried to erase me. By the third day after the party, I noticed the mail no longer came to my name. Everything in the basket by the door was addressed to Daniel or Ashley, even the AARP flyers, the pharmacy coupons, the newsletter from the community center. I used to read the word search at the back while waiting for the kettle to boil. Now bore their names. Mine had vanished. At first, I thought it was a glitch, maybe a forwarding error, but when I asked Daniel, he barely looked up from his laptop. Oh yeah, he said, we had it consolidated, thought it'd be simpler to manage from one inbox. One inbox? I repeated. You know, he said, waving vaguely toward the table, household admin, nothing major. I wanted to argue, but something about the way he said household, as if I weren't part of it, pressed the breath right out of my lungs. That afternoon, I returned from the pharmacy with a small brown bag containing my arthritis meds and a refill on blood pressure pills. The front door was unlocked. A draft of cold air hit me as I stepped in. And then I saw my portrait from the hallway, the one of Dennis and me on our 25th anniversary, was gone. In its place was a canvas print of a birch tree, abstract and white, surrounded by blank space. Clean, modern, impersonal. I stood frozen, fingers tightening around the pharmacy bag. Ashley walked in from the laundry room, wiping her hands on a towel. Oh, surprise. You noticed, she said, motioning to the wall. We're going for a lighter look, it helps with staging. Staging? I asked, even though I already knew. For the baby, she said quickly. Everything needs to feel refreshed. And my picture, she smiled too sweetly. Don't worry, it's safe. We just packed a few of your things to give the house breathing room. Decluttering is so important before a new chapter. She turned and vanished down the hallway, as if she hadn't just admitted to erasing me from my own walls. I walked past the linen closet and opened the hall cabinet. Empty. All the blankets I'd folded neatly 2 weeks ago, the old Afghans Dennis's mother crocheted, even my faded lavender one, they were gone, replaced by a matching beige comforter set, still wrapped in plastic. In the bathroom, my toothbrush was missing from the holder. A new electric one stood in its place, still sealed. My hand towel had been swapped for a monogrammed set with A&D embroidered in gray thread. Everything I touched had been touched already. Replaced. Erased. I opened the medicine cabinet. My face stared back at me in the mirror, pale, older than I remembered. I saw a small yellow post-it tucked into the corner. Please keep this area tidy. Guests will start visiting soon. My name wasn't on it, but it was meant for me. Back in the kitchen, Ashley was rearranging the pantry. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled again. You know, once the baby comes, this whole area will be chaotic. We'll probably need more space down here. Down here? I echoed. Main level, she said, emphasizing it like I was dense. Easy access. We're planning to move the bassinet into your room temporarily. Of course, just until we finish the nursery upstairs. My room, I said. She paused, her back still turned to me. It's just a room, Mary. I clenched the pharmacy bag tighter, the paper crinkling loudly in my hand. No, I said quietly. It isn't. She turned to face me fully now, hands on her hips. We've tried to be gentle about this, but you've had a good run here. We've given you so much freedom, and let's be honest, you're not really contributing anymore. That last word landed like ice water. She must have seen something shift in my face, because she softened immediately, reaching for a more diplomatic tone. What I mean is, we're growing. You're transitioning. We all have to evolve, right? I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't want her to see me tremble. I went outside. The cold hit my cheeks, like glass. The sky was gray, swollen with winter that hadn't quite arrived. My car sat at the curb, dull in the light, paint chipped along the hood, the door handle loose on one side, still standing, still waiting. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door. Inside, it smelled like old upholstery, lemon cough drops, and something faintly floral, remnants of the perfume I used to wear when Dennis was alive. I sat there, the bag of pills on my lap, and opened the glove box. The deed was still there, untouched. I pulled it out and read it again, every word, as if it might change in my hands. It didn't. It was still mine. I was still here, not transitioning, not disposable. Mary Ellen Cartwright, owner, mother, still breathing. I tucked the deed back carefully, smoothing the folds with my palm, then stared out at the house. My house. Even the shutters looked different now. Daniel must have repainted them. A new doormat sat on the steps. Welcome to our growing family. But there was no room for me in that phrase. They'd made that clear. That night, I didn't go back inside right away. I sat in the car until the streetlights clicked on and the porch light flickered against the wind chime Dennis had installed 20 years ago. The breeze knocked it around, aimlessly. No melody, just metal against metal like silverware in a drawer. Familiar. Wrong. The car's warmth had faded. My fingers curled tighter around the paper bag from the pharmacy, the thin paper starting to give where the corner of the prescription box pressed through. I hadn't eaten dinner. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't tired. I was just stopped. A figure appeared in the window, Daniel. He pulled back the curtain and looked toward the driveway. Our eyes didn't meet. He stood there for a beat, then disappeared, like I was just the neighbor's car parked in the wrong spot. I took a slow breath and stepped out into the chill. Inside, the house was quieter than it should have been. My footsteps on the floor felt like a disruption. In the living room, the TV murmured softly, some reality show Ashley liked. The kind where everyone shouted over champagne. I moved past it, unnoticed. In the hallway, the door to my room was half closed. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. Everything had changed. The bedding was different. A dusty rose quilt that didn't belong to me. The rocking chair from the attic had been placed beside the window, complete with a folded knit blanket I hadn't seen in years. A small white noise machine sat on the nightstand, humming faintly. It smelled like lavender and something unfamiliar, new baby detergent maybe. On the dresser was a bottle of prenatal vitamins and a framed ultrasound photo. My slippers were gone. I set the pharmacy bag on the chair and sat down slowly, as if lowering myself into someone else's story. I placed my hands on my knees and stared at the wall. The dent where my sewing machine once stood had been painted over. I didn't cry. I'd done that already. After Dennis died, after the miscarriage we never told anyone about. After Daniel stopped calling for 2 months when he moved to Phoenix, there weren't tears left for things I could still name. There was just the space between what I gave and what I was allowed to keep. I stood again and opened the closet, half full of storage bins. Again, the labels made my chest ache. Nursery, phase, baby gear for assembly. Ashley's, maternity. One of the bins had my handwriting on it. Holiday decor. Mary's had been crossed out with a Sharpie and rewritten as spare lights. Even my labels weren't mine anymore. I sat back down in the chair and placed both feet flat on the floor. They were clearing me out before I had even left. And I wasn't sure what was worse, that they thought I wouldn't notice, or that they assumed I had nothing worth keeping. The drawer beside the bed was unlocked. I pulled it open, empty, except for a box of nursing pads and a notepad with a pre-printed checklist. Pediatrician consult. Doula reference call. Guest room declutter. Begin room conversion. I stared at the last checkmark until the lines blurred. The room conversion was done. I just hadn't left yet. I picked up the paper, folded it slowly, and slid it back into the drawer. Then I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. The white noise machine pulsed, a gentle hiss, like waves on the wrong shore. Some part of me still wanted to hope, wanted Daniel to knock on the door and say, "Mom, let's talk. I see what's happening." But he wouldn't. He'd chosen quiet, safe complicity. He'd taken the path of least resistance. And I'd taught him that. I had always made things easy. I had always folded the towels, paid the debts, stepped back first. Even now, I hadn't said what needed saying, because I didn't want a scene. I didn't want to make it ugly. I just wanted to leave with dignity. I stood again, walked to the chair, and picked up the pharmacy bag. My fingers fumbled with the top of the pillbox, but I wasn't trying to open it. I just wanted to feel something solid in my hands, something still mine. I turned off the noise machine, placed the bag in the dresser, and turned off the light. But I didn't lie in the bed. Instead, I sat back down in the chair beside the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the car parked outside under the street lamp. It looked small from here, unimpressive, forgotten, but it was waiting, and it held the only document in the house that hadn't been tampered with. Tomorrow I would take that paper out again. I would drive to the county office. I would do what needed to be done, not to hurt them, not to get even, but to reclaim my own name before they erased it from the story completely. But for now, I just sat still in the middle of what used to be my life, and listened to the quiet push me further out of it. The next morning, the kettle whistled before the sun broke the sky. I didn't rush to silence it. Let it cry a little. It was the only thing in this house lately that was honest about its discomfort. I poured the water, set the tea bag to steep, and left the mug untouched on the counter. Ashley and Daniel were still upstairs. I could hear the faint creak of their mattress and the thump of a drawer closing. Their life was gaining momentum. Mine was dissolving into a quiet ghost. They tiptoed around. The floor in the hallway moaned as I passed, the same way it always had when Dennis used to come home late. I'd know he was back the moment I heard it. 3 creaks. A pause, then the coat hook rattling. Memory clings to sound. I stepped outside barefoot, the porch boards cold under my soles. The sky was barely blue yet, just a thin layer of bruised lavender. My car waited at the curb, faithful and worn. I walked to it slowly, arms crossed, apron still tied over my nightgown. The door groaned open, just like it always did, and I slipped behind the wheel. It still smelled like lemon balm and thyme. I reached for the glove box and held the deed in my hands again. I smoothed it out, rereading the language with new eyes. Full ownership, unencumbered, sole title holder. The ink hadn't faded. My name stood there, like a flag. I glanced toward the house. The window upstairs was glowing yellow now. They'd be coming down soon. They'd expect me to stay quiet, to nod and make breakfast, I bent to check under the passenger seat, where I used to store a small umbrella, and noticed the corner of something poking out beneath the floor mat. I tugged it loose and blinked. It was a folder. I hadn't seen it in years. Tan, scuffed, the corner chewed from where a mouse once lived in the garage. I opened it, careful not to tear the brittle paper inside. Old documents. Tax returns. The invoice from when we first tiled the kitchen. And there, clipped to the back, the receipt for the down payment on this house. My cashier's check, issued from the credit union where I used to work. $36. It still had my signature. I laughed once, soft, dry, surprised. All this time, I'd thought I lost it. I'd asked Daniel about it 5 years ago, and he said he'd check the files. He never mentioned it again. But here it was, hidden, in the last place anyone would care to clean. I leaned back, folder in my lap, and watched the steam rise from the mug I'd left on the dashboard months ago. The sun was up now, spilling orange light across the lawn. Daniel stepped out, onto the porch in gym shorts and a hoodie. He squinted toward the car and waved once, hesitant. I nodded, but didn't wave back. He went inside without a word. By the time I walked back in, the house smelled like toast and reheated eggs. Ashley sat at the table, flipping through a prenatal magazine. Daniel stood at the stove, pouring himself coffee. "You were out early," he said casually. "Just organizing," I replied, using her own line from last week. Ashley looked up. "We were thinking we might go look at strollers this weekend. Do you want to come?" I stared at her, unsure how to answer. "It's just a thought," she added quickly. "No pressure." Daniel handed me a plate, scrambled eggs, half a slice of toast, no butter, We can talk about everything over breakfast, he said, voice light. I sat, but didn't eat. Everything? I asked. Ashley stirred her tea with the wrong end of the spoon. You know, Daniel said, the timeline, the apartment move. Ashley found a place with a kitchenette. I reached into my apron and slid the folder onto the table, right next to the eggs. Daniel blinked. What's that? Proof, I said. Ashley reached for it, but I stopped her. My name's on every page. Every dollar I put into this house is recorded, legally. Documented. Daniel opened the folder and flipped through slowly. Where did you find this? He asked, his voice smaller than before. Where no one thought I'd look, I said. Under my feet. They didn't speak. Not for a long minute. I don't want to fight, I continued. I don't want guilt or gratitude. I want the truth to be recognized, and I want choices that belong to me. Ashley swallowed hard. So what now? I'm not sure, I said, but I won't be erased. Daniel closed the folder and pushed it back toward me. I thought you lost all this. You didn't ask again. Ashley stood and walked to the sink. Her hands shook as she ran water over her tea mug. I stood too. There's a difference, I said gently, between growing up and growing over someone. They didn't answer. I picked up the folder, walked back to my car, and placed it beneath the seat, not because I needed to hide it, but because I finally knew where it was. By the following morning, I'd made up my mind. Not to fight, not to shout or slam doors. That would only give them something to twist, to point at, and say, see? She's being difficult. No, my power didn't live in volume. It lived in steadiness, in the fact that I had never needed to be loud to be right. I was in the kitchen, before they were. The folder lay neatly on the table, closed now, but not hidden. I'd placed a yellow post-it on top, with 3 words in black ink, let's discuss today. By 7:15, I heard them coming down. Ashley's slippers on the stairs, Daniel's cough from the hallway. Their routine had always been so clocked in, so neat, they expected predictability. I was about to unsettle that. Ashley saw the folder first, and stopped. Daniel bumped into her back and looked over her shoulder. I didn't move from the stove. Morning, I said. Hi, Daniel replied cautiously. You're up early again. Habit, I said. Coffee's fresh. Ashley crossed the room, not sitting, just standing near the chair like it might bite. So, you still want to talk? I always wanted to, I said, turning off the burner. It's just that no one was listening. Daniel took a seat and rubbed his temple. Look, Mom, we're not trying. I know, I interrupted. You weren't trying to hurt me. But that doesn't mean you didn't. The air shifted then, like the kitchen had inhaled and was waiting to exhale again. Ashley finally sat, folding her arms. So what do you want? Just tell us. I want clarity, I said. I want to know why I've been slowly boxed out of a house I built physically and emotionally. Ashley rolled her eyes slightly but said nothing. Daniel leaned forward. We're trying to build a life, a family, and I raised one, I said. I know what it costs. I know what it takes, which is why I recognize when someone's pushing another person out to make space for themselves. He looked down at his mug, quiet. I placed my plate on the table and sat down, eyes steady. I'm not asking for gratitude. I'm not asking for special treatment, but I am asking for respect. And I'm not seeing it. Ashley sighed. Mary, we didn't mean for it to feel that way, but your room is the only one with ground access, the safest for the baby. And frankly, we didn't think you'd mind. You haven't really said anything. No, I said, because I didn't want to be in the way, but staying silent didn't stop you from erasing me. Daniel opened the folder again, flipping through the pages like they might offer him an answer. You kept all this? I did, I said. And I wasn't hiding it. I was protecting myself in case no one else did. The words hung in the space between us, heavier than the sound of the kettle whistling yesterday. Ashley finally said, So what are you saying, that we have to move out? No, I replied, keeping my tone level. I'm saying I'm no longer giving up pieces of myself to stay tolerable. I'm not offering silence in exchange for a place in my own home. If you want to build something here, it has to include me. They both sat still. I've already contacted the title office, I added. I'm ensuring no one tampers with the deed without my consent. I'm also speaking to a lawyer about drawing up boundaries, Legal ones. Daniel's eyes widened. Mom, no need to panic, I said. I'm not evicting you. I'm just ensuring I'm not erased from my own property because someone needs an extra room and a fresh start. Ashley leaned back in her chair. You're being cold. No, I said. I'm being clear. And in that moment, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel pitied or pushed aside. I felt precise, grounded. I'll be using the guest room upstairs temporarily, I said, and I'll take back my storage bins. I want the photo of Dennis back up in the hallway. And I'd like you both to ask me before making changes to shared spaces. Daniel nodded slowly. That's fair. Ashley looked less sure. But she didn't protest. And, I added, if you intend to sell this house someday or change ownership, you'll need my signature. I suggest we begin discussing what that looks like. Not now, but soon. They didn't respond, but the silence was no longer one of dismissal. It was consideration. I picked up my mug and took a sip. Still warm. I don't want tension, I said, but I'm done bending backwards to avoid it. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I didn't realize how far things had gone. No, I said softly, you chose not to. He looked at me then, not like a son looking at an obligation, but like someone remembering who raised him, who gave him the tools he'd use to start this new life. Ashley stood first. We'll give you space. Not space, I said, just a seat at the table. She nodded once, then walked toward the hallway. Daniel followed, then paused. Thanks for not yelling, he said quietly. I never needed to, I replied. I just needed to be heard. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had been. The guest room upstairs hadn't changed much in years. It still smelled faintly of cedar and old fabric softener, a scent that reminded me of childhood summers and borrowed bedsheets. The floral curtains were drawn when I walked in, but I let the light in, morning sun casting long strips across the carpet like stretched-out truths. Daniel and Ashley didn't say anything when I went up to claim the space. Ashley only nodded with pursed lips, and Daniel, to his credit, offered to help carry my boxes. I declined. Some things needed to be moved by hand, not because they were heavy, but because they were mine. I had only 4 boxes, all retrieved from the garage. The 5th one was water-damaged, beyond saving, ornaments and paper crafts melted together like the past, trying to stay whole. I didn't grieve it. Not anymore. What mattered had already been salvaged. I started unpacking around 10. The room had been used for storage mostly. A treadmill leaned against the wall, its cord frayed and twisted. A stack of baby books sat on the nightstand, untouched. There was still a twin-sized bed with a patchwork quilt I'd sewn when Daniel was a teenager, back when he still wanted his name embroidered on things. I laid out my folded sweaters in the small dresser, lined the drawers with shelf paper I found in the kitchen drawer, and placed my reading lamp on the bedside table. The walls were bare, so I taped up 2 old photographs, one of me and Dennis on our front steps in '92, and one of Daniel with missing teeth and knees scraped from a summer he barely remembers. It was a modest space, humble, but it was mine now, claimed, not borrowed. In the closet, I found the box labeled Holiday Decor, Mary's. It was the same one Ashley had crossed out. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it. Inside were mismatched ornaments, a garland of silver bells Dennis had strung together, and a felt stocking with Daniel's name in glitter. I ran my fingers over it, remembering how he used to try and sneak candy into it on Christmas Eve, convinced Santa owed him extra for good behavior. At the bottom of the box, beneath the tissue paper and broken pine cones, was my snow globe. It had been a gift from my mother, a little porcelain cottage inside, dusted with fake snow, and a winding key that played Greensleeves. I hadn't seen it in years. I wound it gently, and the tune drifted out, slightly off-key but still whole. I placed it on the dresser beside the photos, then I sat on the bed and stared at the pieces I'd put together. I wasn't reclaiming grandeur. I was reclaiming presence. The quiet in this room was different than the quiet downstairs. It didn't feel like exclusion, it felt like permission, like breathing room. A knock came at the door just after noon. Daniel. He stepped in cautiously, holding a small plastic bin. These were in the coat closet, he said. Figured they were yours. I took it from him. Thanks. He lingered at the doorway. It looks nice in here. Cozy. It'll do, I said. He looked around, eyes resting on the photo of Dennis. You really kept that quilt? Of course. He walked to the edge of the bed and sat down. You know, I always used to think it was scratchy when I was a kid, but it kept me warm. I smiled faintly. That's what it was for. He didn't speak for a moment, then said, I'm sorry for how things played out. I know, I said, but sorry only matters if it changes something. He nodded. I'll try. That's all I want. He stood again as if the moment had exhausted him. Ashley's going to her mother's for a few days. She needs space. So do you, I think. I didn't argue. Some distance would be good for everyone. After he left, I placed the small bin on the floor and pulled out its contents. A scarf I'd knit but forgotten, 2 cassette tapes of lullabies, and a single shoebox labeled letters. I opened it and found years of scribbled notes, birthday cards, 1 or 2 letters from Dennis when he was away on work trips. But tucked at the bottom was a folded sheet of stationery I didn't recognize. It was a letter from Daniel, from when he was in college, written during his first semester. Mom, I miss your cooking. I miss the way the house smells like cinnamon when it's cold. I miss you. Don't tell Ashley. But I still think no one bakes like you. Hope you're okay. I'm doing fine. I think. Love. D. I read it twice. Then again. The ink had smudged slightly in one corner, maybe from water or a careless thumb, but it was still readable. I folded it carefully and placed it beside the snow globe. A reminder, people forget their best selves sometimes, but they can remember too. Later, I sat in the chair by the window and watched a leaf fall from the elm tree out front. Just one. It twirled and drifted and landed softly on the sidewalk. And I thought, maybe that's all this season of my life needed to be. A landing, not an end, just a new place to stand. Ashley left the next morning. No ceremony, no hugs, just a short note on the kitchen counter. Gone to Mom's. Need space. Back Friday. I found it between the salt shaker and Daniel's keys. She didn't even sign her name. The silence she left behind was different than the one I'd come to know. This one wasn't pointed. It was vacant. Daniel wandered through the house, like a guest unsure of his welcome. We moved around each other carefully, like dancers sharing a floor but not a rhythm. By noon I found myself standing at the top of the stairs, staring down at the hallway where my old room sat, its door closed now quietly looming. I hadn't stepped foot inside it since I moved upstairs, but something pulled me. Maybe it was memory, or maybe it was the weight of what hadn't been said, still echoing beneath the floorboards. I descended slowly, hand gliding along the banister. Dennis had varnished himself. The hallway smelled like fabric softener and lemon oil. Ashley's touches, but beyond the door I knew my scent still lingered. The one of rosemary from my lotion and linen spray I'd used since the 80s. I turned the knob gently. It wasn't locked. The room looked different in the morning light. The rose quilt Ashley had picked was still on the bed, smooth and unwrinkled. A bassinet sat beside the window now, still wrapped in clear packaging, a price tag dangling from its handle. The closet door was ajar, bins stacked neatly within. Nothing of mine remained, not even a stray button or a dust bunny. But I saw it for what it really was. Not a nursery, a replacement, an overriding of presence with potential. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. It was foolish, maybe, to miss the pale yellow curtains I'd sewn, or the creak of the floorboard where I used to place my slippers, but places remember who you were in them. This room remembered me, even if the people didn't. I sat on the edge of the bed and placed my palms on my knees. This room had held me through grief, through 2 winters of aching joints and silent meals. After Dennis died, I had watched the seasons change through its window, counted morning birds, heard my grandson's first laugh from this very hallway. It had been a cocoon, a cave, a place of return, and now it was painted over. I bent forward, reaching under the bed, not sure what I expected to find, and pulled out a single item, a coaster. One of my old ceramic ones, chipped on one side, painted with violets. I turned it over and found my name, scrawled in black marker, Mary's, forgotten, but not removed. I clutched it for a moment, the weight surprisingly grounding. The door creaked open behind me. Daniel stood in the frame, hesitant. I didn't know you were down here, he said softly. I wasn't planning to be, I replied, but the room asked. He nodded and stepped inside. I haven't been in here either. I looked up at him. Why not? He rubbed his neck. Felt wrong. Because it was. He sighed, folding his arms. You're right. We rushed it. The nursery thing. It was Ashley's idea. She thought prepping early would ease anxiety. And it did, I said. For her. He nodded again. For her. I motioned to the bassinet. You could have put that in your room, or in the guest room. I know. We sat in silence, him leaning against the wall, me still holding the violet coaster like a relic. This room wasn't just furniture to me, I said after a while. It was healing. Daniel's eyes darted to the floor. I didn't think of that. You stopped thinking of me as someone who feels, I said gently. You started thinking of me as someone who stays. He closed his eyes briefly. That letter you found, the one from college, I meant every word. I believe you. He sat down on the other end of the bed. I've been thinking, Mom. Maybe it's time we looked at other arrangements. My stomach clenched. What kind of arrangements? He raised a hand quickly. Not like that. I mean, maybe we help you get something new. Somewhere fresh. A place that's yours again. I looked at him carefully. This is mine. On paper. In memory. In effort. I know, he said. But maybe it could be yours without all the complication. I didn't answer right away, because I understood what he was offering. Freedom, control, distance. But it also sounded like exile, with polite packaging. I appreciate the thought, I said slowly. But you don't throw away an old coat just because it doesn't fit you anymore. He glanced at the bins in the closet. So you want to stay here? I want to be seen here. That's different. He let that settle, between us. Then he said, if you wanted, we could move the nursery upstairs. There's space in the study. I looked at him. And what would this room become? He smiled faintly. Yours again. If you'll have it. I traced the edge of the coaster. I never stopped having it. I was just made to feel I shouldn't. We sat there a few minutes more before I stood and placed the coaster on the nightstand. Not tucked away. Not forgot. Displayed. Claimed. I didn't sleep in the downstairs room that night. I let the violet coaster remain on the nightstand like a planted flag, but I returned to the guest room with no bitterness. It wasn't about the square footage or the view anymore. It was about being allowed to choose. By morning, the house was quiet again. Daniel had gone for an early walk. Ashley hadn't returned. I didn't leave a note. I dressed slowly, deliberately, brushed my hair into its usual side bun, ironed my blouse, and fastened the small pin Dennis had given me for our 40th anniversary, a silver leaf. It sat just above my heart. It always reminded me that even things that fall can be beautiful. I walked out with the same folder I'd kept in the car, the deed, the old receipts, and the copies of every payment I'd ever made on this house. The folder wasn't about war. It was about memory, accountability, and dignity. The sedan started with a soft sputter, then settled into its usual hum. The same car Daniel used to make fun of. The one Ashley called your antique. It may not have had GPS or Bluetooth, but it carried me without fail, and today it carried me towards something final. The county office sat on the edge of town, a 2-story building that looked more like a high school than a government center. I parked beneath a jacaranda tree, in bloom, purple petals falling gently onto the windshield. For a moment I sat still, watching the petals dance, then pressed the folder to my chest and stepped out. Inside, the air was cold and smelled faintly of laminate and paper. A young woman at the front desk looked up with the tired eyes of someone who had heard every story and tried not to care. Can I help you, ma'am? I need to verify a deed, I said, and record a note. Do you have an appointment? No, I said, but I've waited long enough. She gave a tight smile and pointed toward a corridor. Room 21 Hine, property records. I thanked her and made my way past beige walls and flickering fluorescents. The building was full of people who had never met me, but who would touch my name today. That meant something. The clerk in room 214 was a man in his 50s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a comb-over that didn't quite work. He greeted me with politeness, but little curiosity. I laid the folder down. I'm the sole title holder of this house, I said. I'd like to file a protective clause to restrict any property changes without my written consent. He raised his eyebrows. Are you adding a cosigner? No, I said firmly. I'm protecting myself from one. He nodded and began typing. I also want to ensure that any future motion to sell, refinance, or convert this property can proceed without a verified letter from me. Not an email, not a call, but a notarized statement. He looked at me for the first time with real attention. Are you in any danger, ma'am? No, I said, but I was in danger of being made invisible, and that ends today. He nodded slowly. Good for you. He printed the forms, handed them to me, and I read every line before signing. I left nothing to assumption. When I slid the documents back across the desk, I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief. Not even victory. Something closer to alignment. I left the office and stood for a long moment beneath the jacaranda tree, breathing in the sharp scent of its petals. They blanketed the car hood now, and for the first time, it didn't bother me. Let them fall. Let things rest where they land. Driving home, I passed the park where Daniel once broke his arm on the monkey bars, and the church where Dennis and I renewed our vows. The bakery was still there, though the awning had faded and they no longer made apple turnovers on Thursdays. Time had moved, but I had not disappeared. When I pulled into the driveway, Daniel was standing near the steps, phone in hand, pacing. He looked up and hurried toward me as I shut the car door. Where were you? He asked, eyes scanning the folder. County office, I replied, had some legal matters to finalize. His jaw tensed. Are you selling the house? No, I said, I'm protecting it. And myself. He ran a hand through his hair. Mom, we could have talked about this. We did talk, I said. I just chose to act afterward. I get that, he said after a pause. But it makes me feel like you don't trust me. I met his eyes. Trust isn't automatic, it's maintained. And mine was worn thin. He looked away. I'm not pushing you out, I continued, but I am stepping back into the center of my own life. He nodded reluctantly. Okay, I hear you. I hope you remember that. We stood there a moment more, the breeze tugging at the hem of my blouse. Then I walked past him, and up the steps. The house smelled like dust and toast. Familiar. I set the folder in the locked drawer of my writing desk and sat by the window with a cup of tea. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. No music, no climactic revelation. Just an old woman, sitting in her own home, finally knowing it would remain hers, on paper, in spirit, in voice. Ashley returned. Friday evening, just as she promised. I was in the kitchen preparing tea when I heard the tires crunch across the driveway. The engine idled a little longer than it needed to, like she wasn't sure if she truly wanted to step back inside. When the door finally opened, she came in with a quiet stiffness. No suitcase, no grocery bags, just her. Daniel looked up from the dining room table, where he'd been thumbing through the mail. He gave her a small, uncertain smile. She didn't return it. Hey, he said. She nodded. Hey. I didn't interrupt. I poured another cup of tea, added a splash of milk the way I always had, and sat quietly by the window. The energy was unmistakable, like a wind had shifted just before a storm. But this storm wasn't loud. It was slow, humming under the floorboards. Ashley walked into the kitchen, her fingers curled tightly around her phone. Mary, she said, looking at me directly for the first time in days. I heard you made some changes with the house. I took a sip of my tea before replying. I clarified boundaries. That's all. You didn't talk to us. I spoke with Daniel. Barely, she snapped. I set the cup down. Ashley, this is not a battle, it's a correction, of roles, of expectations, of respect. She scoffed. It feels like punishment. Then maybe it says more about your actions than mine. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She wasn't used to me meeting her tone with stillness. Daniel came in behind her. Ash, let's just sit down. No, she said, not looking at him. I want to understand what she's doing. I reached over to the drawer beside me and pulled out a sealed envelope, cream-colored, heavy, hand-addressed. This is what I'm doing, I said, holding it up. This is a letter to my attorney. Inside is a formal update to my will and the deed. Ashley's eyes flicked to Daniel. I haven't mailed it yet, I said, because I believe in giving people the opportunity to show me who they truly are before I make something permanent. Ashley's face changed, softened for just a second, before it hardened again. You're threatening us. No, I said gently. I'm warning you what self-preservation looks like after a woman has been made invisible in her own home. The room stilled. Daniel stepped forward. What's in the letter? My intention, I replied, to either leave this home in equal trust to someone who respects it or donate it entirely to a community care foundation. One that provides safe housing to elderly women who've been displaced by family. Ashley's face turned pale. You can't be serious. I am, I said, but I haven't decided. The three of us stood there in a suspended triangle, past, present, and possible future staring each other down. Finally, Ashley spoke. You just give it away? I'd rather give it to strangers who see its value than to family who only see square footage. Daniel sank into the nearest chair, rubbing his eyes. Ashley lowered her gaze, then said quietly, I was scared. About the baby. About everything. I didn't mean to treat you like you were furniture. I didn't answer. I didn't mean it that way. But you did it that way, I said. She nodded. Yeah. A long moment passed. She looked at me again, not with hostility, but with uncertainty. Maybe for the first time, she saw me not as her husband's aging mother, but as a woman, a person, a presence. What now? She asked. I go on with my life, I said. I garden. I write letters. I volunteer on Tuesdays. I make tea. She let out a shaky breath. And us? You decide how you want to exist in that life. I'm not your adversary, but I'm no longer your silent witness. Ashley stepped back, her voice quieter now. Would it matter if I apologized? It would matter if you meant it, I said. But time will prove that better than words. She looked at the letter again. Will you send it? I haven't decided, I repeated, but I'm watching. She turned and left the kitchen, walking slowly down the hallway toward the guest room. Daniel looked at me, eyes full of both apology and weariness. You're strong, he said softly. I had to be. He reached for the letter but didn't touch it. You'll know what to do. I already do, I said. I just want to see if anyone else does too. That night, I didn't put the envelope in the mailbox. I placed it on the mantel instead, where it could be seen, where it could serve as a reminder that silence is never the same as absence, and age is never the same as irrelevance. I watered my plants before bed. I folded my clothes. I listened to the floor creak beneath my feet and knew it remembered me. Tomorrow would come, and I would still be here. The morning came soft, wrapped in a gray sky and the smell of rain in the air. I woke before anyone else and moved slowly, the way one does when silence deserves respect. The house felt different, not because anything had changed physically, but because something had shifted in the air. A boundary had been drawn. Not loudly, not with anger, but with clarity. The envelope still sat on the mantel. I didn't move it. Its presence alone spoke enough. I made oatmeal for myself, stirring slowly in the pot, watching steam curl toward the ceiling. I added honey and a pinch of nutmeg, just as I had for Dennis when he was recovering from surgery years ago. The small rituals still mattered. As I sat at the table, the sound of hesitant footsteps approached. Daniel entered, barefoot and sleep-rumpled, holding a cup of coffee like it was an anchor. Morning, he murmured. Good morning. He sat across from me without asking, sipping slowly. I heard Ashley up late, he said. I imagine she had a lot to think about. He didn't respond right away. She read your letter. I paused. And? She cried. I looked up. Was it guilt or clarity? He exhaled. Maybe both. We ate in relative silence. Outside, a light drizzle had begun, and it tapped against the window like an old clock. Not intrusive, just present. Eventually, Daniel spoke again. We talked last night about moving. I set my spoon down. Moving? Not you, he clarified quickly. Us. Me and Ashley. We're looking at a rental near the university. Small place, but close to the daycare and her office. I absorbed this slowly. You're leaving the house. He nodded. It's time. And the baby? We'd like to bring them back here sometimes. If you'd be open to that. I studied him. My son, who once needed help tying his shoes, now making adult decisions with the weight of generations behind them. You're not being pushed out? I asked. No, he said. We're stepping out. I nodded. Then you'll need the good frying pan, and the soft towels. You'll want the blender too, unless you plan to chew your smoothies. He laughed, a real laugh. and the sound startled both of us. "Thanks, Mom." "I didn't pack your things out of anger," I said. "I preserved what I could." He reached across the table and touched my hand. "I know." After he left for work, I walked back to the living room. Ashley was already there, sitting on the couch with a notepad in her lap, pen resting against her lips. She looked up when she saw me. "Surprised." "I didn't hear you come in," she said. "You were thinking," I replied. "I didn't want to interrupt." She hesitated, then said, "I'm writing a letter to your lawyer." I raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" She shook her head. "It's a letter of release from any claim I might have had, real or assumed. I want you to know it's not about the house anymore." I didn't move, but something inside me relaxed, almost imperceptibly. "I appreciate that," I said. She placed the notepad on the table and looked up at me with something resembling vulnerability. "I don't want to be the villain in your story, Mary." "You're not," I said. "You're just not the hero either." She nodded slowly. "Fair." I crossed the room and sat in Dennis's old chair. The cushion had thinned over time, but it still carried the shape of him. I placed my hands in my lap. "When I was younger," I said, "my mother used to tell me that forgiveness is less like opening a door and more like taking off a coat, something heavy. But you have to decide when the weather's changed enough to do it." Ashley blinked, not quite understanding. "I'm not ready to take the coat off yet," I said, "but I'm no longer hiding beneath it." She swallowed hard and looked down. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not because I was caught or confronted, but because I finally understood what I've been doing, and who I've been doing it to." I nodded once. She stood slowly and walked toward the front window. The rain had thickened slightly, drumming against the panes in a steady rhythm. We both stared at it for a while. "I should pack," she said. "There are boxes in the garage." She didn't move, just stood there with her hands clasped in front of her. "I'll leave the room how I found it." "No," I said. "Leave it better." A pause. "Okay." She left the room quietly, and I remained where I was. The house was silent again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of choices. Hard ones. Honest ones. Not always kind, but finally true. I looked at the envelope on the mantel once more. Then I stood, walked over, and picked it up. I didn't tear it. I didn't burn it. I simply placed it in the drawer beneath Dennis's old photo album, beside a different kind of history. It would remain there, for now. Like insurance. Or a seed. 1 week later, they were gone. The house was quieter than ever, yet it no longer felt hollow. I didn't have to tiptoe through my own halls or shrink into silence during breakfast. Their departure hadn't been dramatic. No tearful goodbyes or lingering gazes, just Daniel loading boxes into the trunk and Ashley closing the front door softly behind her. Even the baby swing had been taken apart and folded neatly in the garage. Now it was just me, and the house, and the afternoon light, pooling in the entryway. I wandered from room to room like a gentle inspector, touching doorframes, opening windows, letting the air breathe again. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and citrus, and I paused by the counter where so many uneasy conversations had occurred. The surface was wiped clean, as though history could be polished away. But memory clung in the corners like sunlight. It didn't need permission to exist. The deed was safe, the will updated, the letter retired to its drawer, and I, after months of emotional slippage, was standing on solid ground again. In the downstairs bedroom, I'd left a vase of fresh gardenias by the window, a kind of punctuation mark on the closing of a chapter. The room now belonged to no one and to everyone, ready for stories yet to arrive. That evening, I opened the wooden box Dennis had kept in the hallway closet. It still held the keys to everything: the shed, the safe, the old jewelry box, even a key to the church where we were married. He'd labeled them with neat little tags and bundled them in rubber bands by category. One read "Back door, sticky lock, don't force." Another said "Garden gate, rusty, but works." I sat with the box in my lap, tracing my fingers over his handwriting. How many of us spend years unlocking spaces for others, only to forget the key to our own peace? I didn't need to sort the keys. I needed to own them. Outside, the rain from earlier in the week had cleared. The sky was pale lavender, and the garden practically shimmered with new growth. I slipped on my sweater and stepped outside with two things in hand: the key box and a small wooden sign I'd painted earlier that day. It read, "Welcome home, again." I planted it near the hydrangeas. The wind moved gently through the trees, not like a warning, but like a sigh. I turned back toward the house. For a long time, this place had felt like a battlefield. Then, like a negotiation. Now finally, it was a sanctuary. Not because others had left, but because I had reclaimed my place inside it. I spent the rest of the evening folding linens, vacuuming hallways, writing thank you notes to no one in particular. Peace didn't come in grand gestures, it came in ordinary moments, strung together until they made a light. As the sky darkened, I boiled water for tea and pulled out an old postcard from the drawer. It was a photo of the Amalfi Coast, some touristy shop print I'd picked up with Dennis decades ago and never mailed. On the back, in his handwriting, were 3 words, "We'll go someday." We never did. Life got in the way. But now I had keys and time. And no one left telling me how I ought to use either. I lit a candle near the window and let the room fill with amber light. The shadows on the walls were soft and familiar. My tea steeped slowly. Everything around me was slow now, and that was the gift. When the doorbell rang, I didn't flinch. It was near 8 p.m., an odd hour for visitors. But I opened the door with calm steadiness. There stood Emma, my granddaughter. 16 now, her hair was longer, her eyes more serious than I remembered. She clutched a backpack and a plastic bag with what looked like takeout boxes. "Hi, Nonna," she said. "Emma," I whispered, blinking at the sight of her. "I had a fight with Mom," she said quickly. "I told her I'm not okay with how she's been treating you. So, I'm here. If you'll have me." I stepped aside immediately. "You're always welcome." She entered, set the food on the table, and took off her shoes like she'd done it 100 times before. No hesitation. "Is it okay?" she asked. "It's better than okay," I said, voice catching in my throat. "It's exactly what this house needed." She smiled and pulled out 2 containers of pasta. "I brought your favorite," she said, "mushroom and spinach. No onions." We sat together in the living room, plates in our laps, candle flickering beside us. She told me about school, about the book she was reading, about her quiet plan to apply to a university out of state. I listened. I asked. I held her words gently. Halfway through the meal, she looked around. "It feels different now," she said. "How so?" "It feels like yours." I nodded. "Because it is." She smiled, and for a brief second, she looked exactly like her father when he was 8. We ate slowly, talked more, and when it was time to sleep, she climbed into the guest bed like it was hers by right. I tucked an extra quilt over her shoulders and kissed her forehead. Back in my room, I stood for a moment before turning off the light. The house was quiet, but no longer waiting. It was living, and so was I.